Algebra 1, let's look at Lesson 4, which is really a continuation of Lesson 3, Advanced Factoring Strategies for Quadratics. All right, first we're going to do a tad bit of review, make sure we understand what we've already learned in the past and see if we can reapply it to something just a tad bit more difficult. So first we're going to factor the following quadratic expressions. If you look at this, it looks like I can factor a 2 out first. I'm left with x squared plus 5x plus 6. Then we want to factor that trinomial into two binomials. If I look, I want two things that multiply to 6 and add to 5. Well, 2 times 3 is 6, and 2 plus 3 is 5. So I'm going to split this up, split that center up into the center term into 2x and 3x. And then take that and factor out sort of what's in the middle. Let's see, too many colors. There we go. Now that 2 hangs out until I'm done. If I look at this first binomial, I can factor out an x. I'm left with x plus 2. Second binomial, I can factor out a 3. I'm left with x plus 2. Luckily, these two binomials match, so I can factor them out, and that is what I get. So there is my answer. Letter B, it looks like I can't factor anything out. So it's quite a bit smaller, or sorry, quite a bit harder. Again, if I look at my normal way that I've done this, if I multiply the two end numbers, first times last, I get negative 36. I want two things that multiply to negative 36 and add to 5. That's a lot of guessing and checking. I can write down all my factors. 1 times 36, 2 times 18, 3 times 12, 4 times 9. I'm looking there for things that add to 5. It looks like that might be it right there. Because if I get negative 4 plus 9, that gives me a 5. So let's try it. 6x squared, instead of 5x, I'm going to write minus 4x plus 9x minus 6. Okay, first two terms, last two terms. I can factor out a 2x. I'm left with 3x minus 2. I can factor out a 3. I'm left with 3x minus 2. These match. Life is grand. Factor those out and write down what's left over. So these are written down there. And that's my answer. Okay, this is harder, but still possible. Okay, that's what we're doing today. If you could push pause and please take a second to read this, that would be great. I'm going to push pause also and then call out a few things that are important in a second. So this method, I don't call it splitting the linear term. I call it factoring by grouping. Sorry, I was interrupted. Here, note we can factor difficult quadratic expressions using a tabular model or by splitting the linear term algebraically. I call it factoring by grouping. I don't use the tabular method. I don't find it easy, so I don't spend much time working on it. So now we're just going to practice. We just have 2 slides, 4 questions. I can't factor anything out, but I can multiply the first and the last. We call it the AC, which is the A term, and the C term. I get negative 20. I'm going to split that up into 2 things that multiply to negative 20 and add to negative 1. I know 4 times 5 is 20. And if I make that one negative, if I multiply those, I get negative 20. And if I add them, I get negative 1. So 2x squared plus 4x minus 5x. It doesn't matter what order I put those 2 in. I'm just splitting that middle term into 2 things that add to get the same thing. So I'm not changing the algebra any. Okay, that negative x is equal to 4x minus 5x. And now I want to group the first 2 terms and the last two terms. Notice I've sort of grabbed that negative in front of the 5. I'm going to factor out a 2x. I'm left with x plus 4. Nope, x plus 2. I want to factor out, whenever I have a negative here, every single time I want to factor out a negative, and I'm going to factor out a negative 5, and I'm left with x plus 2. If I distributed that back, I would get negative 5x minus 10, which is what I started with, so I know I'm right. Now factor out the binomial, write down what is left, and I'm done. First time last is negative 120. We want to multiply two things that give me negative 20, but add to 7. Let's see, 2 times 60, 3 times 40, 4 times 30, 5 times 24, 6 times 20, nope, 7, 8, 8 times 15, there we go. So 8 times 15, if I make it negative 8 times 15, I get negative 20, and if I add those, I get a positive 7. Phew. See, that one was really hard, but we got it, because we're going to just factor by grouping. 6x squared minus 8x plus 15x minus 20. First two, last two. Go ahead and factor out your GCF from that first binomial. I get a 2x. I'm left with 3x minus 4. And then a 5, 3x minus 4. Factor the binomial out. Those always match. And write down what's left. Last slide, 2 more problems. If you remember, I always factor out a negative 1 before I start. So I'm going to have a negative 4x squared minus 4x plus 1. Now I multiply these, I get a 4 and a negative 4. So here, if I do negative 2 times negative 2, I get positive 4, and negative 2 plus negative 2 is negative 4. So I got it. So I'm going to split that up. 4x squared minus 2x plus 1. Group. Notice I grabbed that negative in the second grouping. Factor out a 2x. I'm left with 2x minus 1. Factor out a negative 1. Like I said, we always factor out the negative. It doesn't change now. Okay, we've got a binomial and a binomial. Factor that out. And negative out front. Okay, that works for an answer. The area of a particular triangle can be represented by that trinomial. What are its base and height in terms of x? Area of a triangle is 1/2 base times height. So we are basically looking for base and height, whatever's left in the parentheses. We're looking for a binomial and a binomial. Let's see if we can factor out a 1/2 first. If I do that, I have a 1/2 out front. If I multiply 1/2 by the number 2, it becomes a 1. Factor out that, I get a 3 and a 9. Okay, now I can go ahead and factor the trinomial into 2 binomials. Negative 18, 3. Let's see. 6 times 3 is 18. And if I make that a negative, it works. So 1/2, 2x squared plus 6x minus 3x minus 9. Group the first two, the second two. I can factor out a 2x. I'm left with x plus 3. Factor out a negative 3, x plus 3. So 1/2 x plus 3 and 2x minus 3. So I know that one of these is my base and the other one is my height. I don't know which one though. That's it. Here's your summary. That's what we've learned today. It's relatively more efficient and reliable to do. They call splitting the linear term, or I call it factoring by grouping. Good work today.